I never expected a simple box of cookies to turn my entire world upside down. Birthday surprises are supposed to be sweet, warm, and filled with love. But the moment I saw the neatly wrapped package on my doorstep, I knew that this was going to be anything but ordinary. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the box, my mind racing with curiosity, excitement, and somewhere deep down, an unease I couldn't quite explain. The label was handwritten in my son's familiar scrawl. I could almost hear his voice as I read it. "Happy birthday, Mom. Love, Jacob." I smiled, thinking of the boy I had raised, the man he had become, and the thought that he had remembered me, even in the chaos of his busy life. The house smelled faintly of sugar and vanilla as I opened the box, revealing perfectly baked cookies, neatly stacked and carefully wrapped in parchment. It was a gesture of love, and part of me felt my heart swell with pride. But as I held the box, a nagging thought crept in. Jacob's wife, Melissa, my daughter-in-law, had always been difficult. She rarely spoke to me without a hint of coldness, a forced politeness that barely masked her disdain. I had tried to be patient, to let her warmth grow naturally, but nothing seemed to change. And lately, her sharp comments during family dinners had started to wear on me, leaving me tense, anxious, and often questioning my place in my own family. I set the box down on the kitchen counter and thought about the situation carefully. I could feel the conflict brewing in my mind. On one hand, it was my son's gift, a simple, kind-hearted gesture meant to make me happy. On the other hand, Melissa's constant snide remarks and subtle attempts to make me feel unwelcome had festered into frustration and resentment that I couldn't ignore. The cookies were a symbol, not just of Jacob's love, but also of attention I could no longer bear silently. As I pondered, my neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, happened to stop by. She had known me for years, always quick with advice and a sympathetic ear. She peered at the box and smiled. "Cookies from your son?" she asked warmly. I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, but I'm not sure how to respond," I admitted quietly. "Melissa has made it difficult to enjoy these little gestures." Mrs. Callahan raised an eyebrow knowingly. "Sometimes you have to do what feels right for you," she said softly. "Don't let anyone take your happiness or your birthday away from you." Her words stirred something inside me, a spark of courage I hadn't felt in a long time. I looked at the cookies again, their perfect golden brown surfaces almost taunting me. And then, on a whim, one fueled by a mix of frustration, mischief, and a desire to make a statement, I did something I never thought I would. I decided to give the cookies to Melissa's mother, my son's mother-in-law, who lived nearby. I could feel the tension building even as I made the short drive, the box sitting in my lap like a ticking time bomb. What would she think? What would Jacob think? And more importantly, how would Melissa react? The anticipation made my stomach churn. I rang the doorbell, my fingers fidgeting nervously, and waited. The door opened slowly, and there she was, smiling, unsuspecting, completely unaware of what had brought me here. "Happy birthday," I said, handing over the box with an almost innocent smile. Her eyes lit up. "For me?" she asked, delighted. I nodded. "I thought you might enjoy them," I said, the tiniest smirk tugging at the corner of my lips. Little did Melissa know, this small act was about to set off a chain reaction that would turn our family upside down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which country you're watching this video from. Enjoy the story. As I walked away, I felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. Something inside me told me that this was just the beginning. One simple gift had just become a spark, and I had no idea how the fire would spread. I hadn't gone far when my phone buzzed. A text from Jacob appeared on the screen. "Mom, did you give the cookies to my mom?" My heart skipped a beat. He had noticed already. I paused, taking a deep breath, unsure whether to reply or stay silent. I could feel a knot of anticipation in my stomach. This simple act had started something much bigger than I had imagined. Before I could type anything, another notification arrived. It was from Melissa. "What did you do with the cookies, Mom? You know they were for me." My palms sweated. I had expected some reaction, but not this quickly. Melissa's tone carried that familiar edge, sharp, accusatory, almost venomous. She had found out, and she wasn't hiding her anger. I leaned against the car, trying to steady my thoughts. I hadn't acted out of malice, at least not completely. It was a mixture of frustration, rebellion, and quiet desire to make a statement. Melissa's constant coldness had made every family interaction tense, And this little gift had become a way to test boundaries, to see if anyone would stand up to her. By the time I walked back into the house, I could hear voices raised in the living room. I froze at the doorway. Melissa was pacing, her hands flying as she spoke, and Jacob was trying to calm her, his face a mask of confusion and concern. "Mom just brought them over?" he asked, voice low but firm. Melissa shook her head furiously. "Yes, she gave them to her. Can you believe that? She thinks she can." I stepped into the room slowly, the box of cookies long gone, but the tension still tangible in the air. The entire dynamic had shifted. Jacob turned to me, his brows furrowed. "Mom, why would you do that?" I met his gaze steadily, refusing to back down. I thought she might enjoy them. It seemed like a kind gesture. My words were calm, but I could sense the storm brewing. Melissa's eyes narrowed, the heat of anger rising on her cheeks. She repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Those were for me, not her. You don't get to decide that." I felt my chest tighten, but I refused to be intimidated. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "people need to understand that their actions have consequences. I've been patient, polite, and quiet for too long. Maybe this will teach someone a little humility." Melissa's hands clenched at her sides. She took a step closer, her tone sharp and dangerous. "You think this is a game? You think you can undermine me in my own family?" Jacob stepped between us, his voice rising. "Melissa, calm down. This isn't a battle, it's just cookies. Let's not blow this out of proportion." But she shook her head violently, her eyes blazing. "No, Jacob. This is more than cookies. It's about respect. And she clearly has none." I could feel the tension spiraling, thickening the air. The room seemed smaller, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on us. The holiday decorations that had seemed cheerful now felt like props in a play about confrontation and family rivalry. Every glance, every gesture carried weight. I swallowed hard, knowing this moment would define how our family interacted from now on. I could either step back, let Melissa continue her intimidation, and let resentment grow, or I could stand my ground and force a reckoning. My decision made, I squared my shoulders, ready for whatever came next. And then, just as I opened my mouth to speak again, the doorbell rang. Everyone froze. A new presence, unexpected and significant, had just arrived. No one moved, all eyes on the door. Who could it be? A neighbor? A friend? Or someone else entirely, about to tip the fragile balance in ways none of us could predict? The air crackled with anticipation. The cookies, simple as they were, had set off a chain reaction, one that would force secrets, grievances, and hidden tensions into the open. And I knew, deep down, that the night was far from over. The doorbell rang again, insistent this time, cutting through the rising tension like a knife. Melissa froze mid-rant, her face twisted with frustration. Jacob stepped toward the door, his hands raised in a calming gesture, while I stayed rooted in the middle of the living room, feeling the weight of anticipation press down on me. Who could possibly be visiting now, in the middle of this chaotic scene? Jacob opened the door slowly, and my heart skipped a beat. Standing there, holding a small, unassuming bag, was my mother-in-law, Melissa's own mother. Her presence was unexpected, yet somehow commanded attention. Her eyes swept across the room, immediately taking in the charged atmosphere. There was a faint, knowing smile on her lips, as if she had already sensed the storm brewing before she arrived. "Hello," she said politely, her tone soft but firm. "I came by to drop something off." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary, and I felt a flicker of connection, a silent understanding that she wasn't here to escalate the argument, but perhaps to witness it unfold. Melissa's face darkened instantly. "What are you doing here?" she demanded sharply. "Didn't you get enough attention already with those cookies?" I remained calm, my eyes locked on hers. "I thought she might like a little birthday treat," I said softly, gesturing toward the empty cookie box that had already been enjoyed. The tension in Melissa's shoulders tightened further, and I could feel the room's energy shifting again. Jacob looked between us, confused and frustrated. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked quietly. I could see the worry in his eyes. He had no idea just how much this small box of cookies had already stirred the water beneath our family's surface. Melissa's mother stepped inside, placing her bag carefully on the counter. She reached in and pulled out a small plate, neatly arranged with what looked like freshly baked treats. I thought I'd add something special, she said, her voice gentle. Perhaps we can all enjoy a little sweetness and calm down a bit. Melissa's jaw dropped. She stepped closer, her tone sharp, bordering on accusation. You're taking sides, she exclaimed, her voice echoing through the room. You're encouraging this ridiculous defiance. But her mother, calm and unflinching, met her glare steadily. I'm not taking sides, Melissa. I am here to remind everyone that we can be civil, and that actions have consequences, sometimes bigger than we anticipate. The words hit harder than any cookie ever could. I could feel the room go still, each of us suddenly aware that this was more than a minor argument about treats. It was a confrontation about respect, boundaries, and family dynamics that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Melissa took a step back, her face pale with frustration. She turned to Jacob, her eyes pleading. You see this? You must do something. Jacob swallowed, caught between his mother and his wife. For the first time that evening, I saw hesitation in his eyes. He was realizing that neutrality wasn't an option, that someone had to take a stand, and that moment had come. I looked toward Melissa's mother, feeling a wave of quiet gratitude. Her presence had shifted something fundamental. Suddenly, the balance of power in the room felt different. I was no longer just defending myself. I had allies, subtle though they might be. And then, as if to punctuate the tension, the oven timer beeped from the kitchen. The smell of warm cookies filled the air once again, but this time it wasn't just sweetness. It was a symbol, a reminder that actions, no matter how small, can ripple through a family in unexpected ways. Melissa's hands trembled as she crossed her arms, realizing that this birthday, these cookies had exposed cracks in her carefully maintained authority. And I knew, deep down, that the night's surprises were far from over. One small gesture had ignited a fire, and now everyone in the room could see the sparks flying. The next move was uncertain. Would Melissa lash out? Would Jacob finally step forward? Or would the quiet power of observation, Melissa's mother's calm presence, be enough to shift the family forever? One thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. Melissa's eyes blazed as she stared at her mother, her frustration barely contained. You're encouraging this, she snapped, pointing toward me. You think it's okay for her to undermine me in my own house? Her mother remained calm, composed, and unwavering. Melissa, she said softly but firmly, sometimes people need to see their actions reflected at them. I'm not encouraging anyone to fight. I'm just reminding you that respect is earned, not demanded. The words landed in the room like a splash of cold water. Melissa's face paled slightly, and for the first time that evening, she seemed at a loss. Jacob took a step toward his mother, gently placing a hand on her arm. Melissa, let's just calm down, he urged, but she shook him off, her energy radiating tension. I took a deep breath, feeling a sudden surge of confidence. All this time, I had tried to avoid confrontation, staying polite and quiet while Melissa dominated every family interaction. But tonight, with the presence of her mother and the knowledge that I had taken a stand, I felt a power I hadn't experienced before. I spoke slowly, deliberately. Melissa, these cookies were meant as a gesture. But it seems clear that we've allowed small frustrations to fester. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I simply wanted to share something with someone who would appreciate it. Melissa's hands trembled, her jaw tight. Appreciate it, she repeated, her voice sharp. You gave them to her. How dare you decide that for me? I held my ground, meeting her glare without flinching. Sometimes decisions are made for the sake of perspective, I said quietly. Maybe now you can understand how it feels when someone dismisses your efforts or disregards your feelings. Perhaps this is an opportunity for reflection. Her mother nodded subtly, reinforcing the calm authority she radiated. Jacob watched us both, caught between loyalty and concern. I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He knew that this was more than a minor disagreement. Something significant had shifted. Melissa's anger didn't dissipate, but it wavered, faltering under the weight of truth. She turned abruptly, storming toward the kitchen, muttering under her breath. Jacob followed her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. I could hear his voice low and urgent. Melissa, listen. This isn't about winning or losing. Mom didn't mean harm. Let's try to fix this. I stayed in the living room watching them go, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. The tension had eased slightly, but I knew the night wasn't over. This moment was just the turning point. The calm before the storm was fully resolved. I realized that I had created space for a conversation that had been impossible before. Then, unexpectedly, my phone buzzed again. A message from Jacob. "Mom, can you come in here? I need to show you something." My pulse quickened. I had no idea what he had found or why he was calling me, but instinct told me it would be important. I walked cautiously into the kitchen. Jacob held up his phone, showing a photo. My stomach tightened as I recognized it instantly. It was a picture of Melissa, her expression shocked, sitting at her mother's kitchen table, happily enjoying the cookies I'd given her. But there was more written beside her in handwriting I had never noticed before were the words, "Sometimes it takes someone else to remind you what really matters." I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and unease. My small act of defiance, the simple gesture of giving the cookies to her mother, had caused Melissa to pause, reflect, and perhaps even change. But it had also revealed the depth of the tension that had been hidden beneath polite smiles and forced pleasantries. Jacob glanced at me, his voice quiet but firm. "Mom, maybe this was the wake-up call she needed. Maybe this can finally reset everything." I nodded slowly, realizing he was right. But deep down, I knew there was one more crucial step. The confrontation, the reflection, and the lesson had begun, but the resolution, the real closure, had yet to come. And I could feel it in my bones. The final moment, where truths would be acknowledged and the family's balance truly restored, was just ahead. Melissa stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the empty plate that had once held the cookies. The words she had read on the note, "Sometimes it takes someone else to remind you what really matters," echoed in her mind. For the first time that evening, she was silent, her usual fire and sharpness replaced with hesitation and reflection. She had always demanded control, always expected to be the center of every family interaction, but now, confronted with a simple act of kindness redirected to her mother, she couldn't deny the truth. Jacob placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Melissa," he said softly, "maybe this was Mom's way of showing that small gestures matter, but also that respect and consideration are even more important. Maybe we can all start fresh." Melissa's lips pressed together as she exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders gradually easing. She finally looked at me, her eyes no longer blazing, but tentative and uncertain. "Mom," she began, her voice quieter than ever before. I didn't realize. I've been so focused on myself. I didn't think about how my attitude affected you, or how you might feel in our family." I studied her, sensing sincerity in words, but also knowing that actions, not apologies, would prove change. I nodded gently. "Melissa, what matters is what comes next. You can choose to treat me and everyone else with respect. That's the lesson we've all learned tonight." Her mother, standing nearby, offered a small, approving smile. "Sometimes people need a little nudge," she said softly, "to remember that family isn't about winning arguments. It's about kindness, consideration, and understanding." Melissa's gaze fell to the counter where the empty cookie plate had been, then back to me. "I see that now," she said quietly. "I'll let my frustration get in the way. I want to make this right, if you'll let me." I took a deep breath, the weight of the evening finally beginning to lift. "Melissa," I replied, "I don't want grudges, and I don't want resentment. What matters is moving forward together as a family. That means acknowledging mistakes and making the effort to change." Jacob smiled faintly, relief visible on his face. "Mom, I think this is the turning point," he said almost to himself. "Maybe tonight was hard, but it's also the start of something better." Melissa hesitated, then nodded. "I want that too," she said softly. Her mother placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and I felt a sense of quiet victory, not over anyone, but over the fear, resentment, and tension that had long dominated our family interactions. As the evening progressed, the mood slowly shifted. Melissa offered a tentative smile and even suggested we bake another batch of cookies together, a small gesture that symbolized more than just desserts. It was a bridge being rebuilt, a truce forged through understanding. I agreed, smiling in return. The warmth of the kitchen and the scent of sugar and chocolate filled the air, but this time it carried something more meaningful: reconciliation. Jacob watched quietly, clearly relieved. "I'm proud of all of us," he said softly. "It wasn't easy, but we faced it. And now maybe things can finally be different." I realized then that the cookies, so small and seemingly insignificant, had done more than satisfy a sweet tooth. They had ignited change. They had sparked reflection, confrontation, and ultimately, reconciliation. The tension that had threatened to tear us apart had been transformed into a lesson in empathy, respect, and patience. Melissa's mother looked at me and whispered, "Sometimes a simple act is all it takes to remind people what really matters." I nodded, understanding completely. That night, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't known was possible. The challenges in our family were not magically gone, but the foundation had shifted. Respect had been asserted, lessons had been learned, and a new chapter had begun. As I cleaned up the kitchen and set the table for a late snack, I reflected on the night's events. One small box of cookies had stirred anger, reflection, and growth. And in that process, I realized something profound. The smallest gestures, when guided by intention and courage, can create the largest ripple of change. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace, not just with my son or my daughter-in-law, or even her mother, but with myself. I had acted with dignity, patience, and purpose, and the family that had once seemed divided now held a fragile but real promise of unity. And that promise was far sweeter than any cookie could ever be.